Mariana was used to taking on challenges in her profession, but when she accepted this new job, something in her chest didn't feel right. The job seemed simple enough: caring for Gabriel, a boy who had been in a coma for months. The pay was good, the responsibilities clear, and the location: an isolated mansion surrounded by ancient, towering trees. As she drove down the narrow road, she watched the leaves fall slowly, the sky covered with heavy clouds, as if time itself was trying to warn her about what was to come. When she passed through the rusted gate, she was greeted by Clara, Gabriel's mother. Unlike what Mariana expected from a grieving mother, Clara was distant, cold, with no trace of emotion on her pale face. Her vacant stare seemed to look right through Mariana, as if the pain had consumed her soul, leaving only a body behind. "He's in the room on the second floor. Do what you need to, but don't disturb him more than necessary," Clara said in a tone that bordered on contempt. In the corner of the room, a tall and imposing figure appeared, Dr. Felipe. His eyes seemed to assess her carefully. He was the doctor responsible for Gabriel, and unlike Clara, his gaze was serious, almost hostile, as if he had seen things no one else should see. Mariana felt a chill run down her spine. "The case is delicate but stable. For now," he said without giving more details. As Mariana climbed the stairs to finally meet Gabriel, each step felt heavier than the last. The house, grand and luxurious from the outside, was cold and silent inside. Something about that mansion didn't feel right. The first day of work began like any other for Mariana. Gabriel, the boy lying in that huge bed, seemed so fragile yet so distant, trapped in a deep silence that was almost tangible. His thin little arms lay motionless, and the only sound in the room was the constant hum of the machines monitoring his vital signs. Mariana adjusted the tubes, checked the medications, and with every move, the strangeness inside her grew. The house, on the other hand, was unlike anything she had ever experienced. The silence there was oppressive, suffocating. She expected to hear the creaking of the wooden floor, a window rattling in the wind, but nothing. It was as if time had stopped in that mansion, and Clara, Gabriel's mother, did nothing to ease that tension. The woman passed through the hallway like a shadow, avoiding long conversations, answering briefly and distantly when Mariana tried to talk about the boy. "He doesn't need anything else for now," Clara would say, as if her son's condition was just an inconvenient detail. Around mid-afternoon, while Mariana was organizing some instruments in Gabriel's room, the feeling came. Like a chill creeping up her neck, a disturbing certainty. Someone was watching. She looked around, her eyes scanning every corner of the room. Nothing. Maybe she was just tired. But as the day wore on, the feeling lingered. In the hallways, in the living room, even in the kitchen. An invisible weight seemed to follow her, as if unseen eyes were always fixed on her movements. She tried to focus on her work, but the question tormented her. What is happening in this house? The following days were a mix of routine and strangeness for Mariana. Caring for Gabriel had become almost mechanical, measuring his heartbeat, checking his breathing, adjusting his medication. But between these silent and repetitive moments, something new started to happen. Small movements. At first, Mariana thought she was imagining things. Maybe exhaustion was playing tricks on her mind. It was subtle, almost imperceptible. Gabriel's hand, once motionless, twitched briefly. Just a slight contraction. His eyes, closed and expressionless, seemed to move under his eyelids, as if he were in a restless dream. Mariana moved closer to the bed, watching carefully, and felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe he was responding to some stimulus. Maybe he wasn't as lost as everyone thought. However, when she shared her observations with Dr. Felipe, his response was a cold dose of reality. He looked at her with that professional and slightly condescending expression doctors use when they don't want to be offensive, but also don't take you seriously. "Mariana, this is completely normal in cases like his. They're just involuntary reflexes, nothing more than muscle spasms. There's no reason to be concerned." But something about it didn't sit right. Mariana couldn't shake the feeling that the movements were more than just reflexes. Something was different. She continued to observe Gabriel in the following days, and the movements increased. His fingers moved almost deliberately. Once, Mariana was sure she saw a slight tremor in his leg. Every time she looked at him, the silence of the house felt heavier. Was Gabriel trying to say something? Or was it the house? The sense of unease inside Mariana had grown to an unbearable level. Every time she cared for Gabriel, she was sure something was wrong. And it wasn't just the movements, now more frequent and precise. It was the oppressive silence of the house. Clara's cold gaze. Dr. Felipe's indifference. Something was being hidden. She could feel it. Driven by growing restlessness, Mariana decided she needed answers. She took advantage of a moment when the house was empty and began to search through Gabriel's medical records. Detailed reports described his vegetative state with precision, but as she flipped through them, Mariana noticed gaps. They were small, almost insignificant to an inattentive person, but to her, an experienced nurse, these omissions were glaring. One night, as she quietly returned to Gabriel's room, she overheard muffled voices coming from Clara's office. Curious, she approached without being seen. The voices were tense. "He can't get better. That would ruin everything," Clara whispered, her voice filled with worry. Dr. Felipe replied, calmer. "I'm taking care of it, but we need to make sure no one finds out what really happened to the boy." Mariana froze. Whatever they were hiding went far beyond what she had imagined. Fear became palpable. Her suspicions were now confirmed. There was something dark behind Gabriel's condition, and she knew she couldn't trust anyone in that house. The next day, determined to understand what was happening, Mariana sought out Clara. Her heart raced, but she knew she could no longer ignore what she had overheard. She knocked on the door to Gabriel's mother's office, bracing herself for a confrontation. Upon entering, she found Clara sitting in her leather chair, her cold gaze seeming to pierce through her soul. "We need to talk about Gabriel," Mariana began, her voice steadier than she expected. "I know something's wrong. What really happened to him, too?" Clara slowly stood up, her expression hardening. "You're here to take care of my son, not ask questions," she replied with a tone laced with a veiled threat. "I'm a nurse, I know what I've seen," Mariana insisted, but before she could continue, Clara stepped forward, her presence filling the room. "Listen carefully, Mariana. I brought you here to do your job and nothing more. Anything else and will cost you dearly." Her eyes glinted with something dark. "Stay out of things that don't concern you." The threat was far from subtle. Mariana felt the blood in her veins run cold, her breath becoming shallow. The mansion, already oppressive, now felt like a prison. Clara had made it clear she wouldn't hesitate to silence her if necessary. Mariana backed away, realizing she was completely alone in that place. The sense of danger was undeniable, and trusting anyone in that house seemed out of the question. She no longer knew whom to trust. And soon, it might be too late to do anything about it. Night had fallen, plunging the mansion into deep shadows and unsettling silences. Mariana knew this was her chance. With soft steps, as if the very floor could betray her, she made her way to Dr. Felipe's office. Her hands trembled as she turned the doorknob, slipping quietly into the room. The office smelled of old books and piled papers, but what caught her attention most was the locked drawer in the corner of the desk. After a quick search, she found a small key hidden between the pages of an anatomy book on the shelf. With a barely audible click, the drawer opened. Inside, among disorganized papers and clinical reports, was the truth she had feared. Mariana pulled out a thick dossier, and the first pages made her stomach churn. It was about Gabriel, the boy she cared for every day. But what was written was disturbing. "Experimental treatment unauthorized," the notes read. Each detail revealed a horrifying reality. Gabriel had been subjected to clinical trials with a new drug, without proper consent, leading him to his vegetative state. She feverishly flipped through the documents, her heart pounding in her chest. Dr. Felipe's signature was there, alongside Clara's. They knew everything. They were covering up the failure of the experiment, hiding the truth under layers of silence and threats. It was a dirty game to protect their careers and the family's reputation. Mariana backed away from the desk, feeling the weight of her discovery on her shoulders. The child wasn't just a victim of an accident or a cruel illness. He was a prisoner of the ambitions of unscrupulous adults, and now she knew more than she should. The wind howled outside, but inside the mansion, the silence was suffocating. Back in her room, Mariana tried to calm herself after what she had uncovered. She knew she had to act quickly. Trembling, she reached for her phone to try to call someone, anyone who could help her. However, as she searched through her bag and drawers, she noticed something unsettling. Her phone was gone. Her eyes scanned the room, panic rising. Every detail now seemed darker. There was no doubt. They were watching her every move. A sense of imprisonment tightened around her chest. The mansion, once cold and desolate, now felt like an oppressive maze where every corner could hide a pair of watchful eyes. She tried to remain calm as she walked down the stairs to the main hall, pretending to be casual, but her heart pounded in her chest. The corridor seemed longer than ever, the shadows thicker. Suddenly, a figure appeared at the end, Clara with her cold, piercing gaze. She didn't say a word, but the chilling smile that crept across her lips was enough for Mariana to understand. Every step she took was being monitored. The mansion, already sinister, had now become a prison. Escaping that place wouldn't be easy, not with Clara and Felipe always one step ahead, controlling her every move, blocking every attempt to flee before it even began. Mariana knew her options were limited. Every escape or cry for help was blocked, but she still had one weapon, the truth. And to expose the truth, she needed proof. The tiny recorder hidden in her pocket was now her only hope. That night, she approached Felipe with a new plan. She pretended to have a change of heart, acting as though she was resigned and willing to cooperate. She casually brought up Gabriel's condition, feigning interest in the experimental treatments. Felipe's voice, usually firm and controlled, seemed to relax as he spoke. He began to detail what he had done, believing Mariana was now on his side. There was no choice, he murmured. The treatment was his only chance. We couldn't stop even when we saw it was going wrong. The confession flowed, each word more revealing than the last. Felipe mentioned the risks they had taken, how Clara had helped keep the secret, and how Gabriel, though in a coma, was the key to their medical ambitions. Mariana felt the weight of the recorder in her pocket. Now, with this evidence, she could finally bring to light the horror they had covered up. But as Felipe continued talking, a chill ran down her spine. She knew that if she were caught, there would be no escape. The danger once looming was now very real. Mariana was moments away from her freedom, the recorder firmly in her hand, when the door burst open. Clara, her eyes blazing with fury, stood in the doorway blocking her exit. Without a word, she quickly advanced, grabbing Mariana's arm with a vice-like grip. The nurse tried to resist, but Clara was relentless. "You think you can destroy us?" Clara whispered, her voice cold and dripping with venom. "No one leaves here without our permission." Before Mariana could scream or fight back, she was dragged to one of the back rooms of the mansion. The walls were thick, muffling any sound that might escape. The door shut with a heavy click, locking her into what seemed to be her new and terrifying fate. Mariana knocked on the door, shouted, but all she received in return was the silence of the house. Despair began to seep into her veins. She knew she had to find a way out, but every plan that formed in her mind seemed to crumble against the cruel reality. The recorder was still hidden, but what good would it be if she couldn't make it out alive? Time passed slowly, and the mansion, once just strange, now became a true labyrinth of fear. Alone in the room, with the darkness closing in, Mariana began to question whether she had the strength to survive, or if her story would end right there. The darkness was almost complete, but Mariana couldn't sleep. Adrenaline coursed through her body, keeping her alert despite her growing fear. Locked in that stifling room, her thoughts raced. And that's when she noticed the window. It was narrow, but maybe, just maybe, enough. With effort, she quietly stacked furniture, each movement carefully calculated not to alert Clara or Felipe. When she finally reached the window, she forced the glass, which gave way with a soft creak. The cold night air rushed into the room, invigorating her. Mariana crawled through the small opening, scratching her arms and legs but managing to squeeze herself outside. She had barely touched the ground when she heard footsteps inside the house. Clara, realizing her absence, was shouting furiously, her voice echoing through the mansion. Mariana ran without looking back, her heart pounding so fast it felt like it might leap out of her chest. The house, with its long hallways and identical doors, had turned into a maze. Every move Mariana made was guided by pure instinct. She hid behind curtains, darted through doors she didn't recognize, and more than once heard Clara approaching, her breath heavy and filled with rage. Finally, as she turned a corner, she spotted the main door. With a surge of adrenaline, she sprinted toward freedom. Clara appeared behind her, screaming her name in fury, but it was too late. Mariana burst through the door, stumbling down the steps, and bolted down the dirt road, the biting cold pushing her forward. When the headlights of a car appeared in the distance, a mix of relief and desperation washed over her. She waved frantically, nearly collapsing from exhaustion. The vehicle stopped, and at last, Mariana knew she had made it. She had the proof, and more importantly, her life. Sitting in front of the police station, the recorder in her hands, Felipe's confession still echoed in her mind. The weight of what she held was immense. It wasn't just evidence. It was the key to saving Gabriel and bringing those responsible to justice. When she handed the evidence to the police, she felt a mix of relief and fear. The process would be long, and she didn't know how far Clara and Felipe would go to protect themselves. Days later, the case exploded in the news headlines and reports. The media was ablaze with the shocking revelations. Illegal experiments on children, the scandal that shook the medical world. It was an unprecedented scandal, and Clara and Felipe became the faces of cruelty and unchecked ambition. Cameras surrounded the mansion, now a symbol of corruption and abuse. When Clara was handcuffed in front of reporters, her cold stare didn't falter. Felipe, pale and defeated, could barely keep his head up. Mariana watched it all on TV, feeling a mixture of justice and sorrow. There was no victory without pain. Gabriel, on the other hand, was immediately taken to a specialized hospital where he finally received the care he so desperately needed. Although he remained in a coma, the doctors assured that with the right treatment, there was a small chance of recovery. At that moment, Mariana knew her fight had been worth it. Though the scars of the experience would stay with her forever, she had achieved the most important thing: exposing the truth and giving Gabriel a chance to survive. Sitting on her apartment sofa, Mariana stared out the window, the city lights flickering in the distance. Everything seemed so far away now, as if those days in the mansion were part of another life. The weight of recent events still pressed on her chest, but it was different. It wasn't the paralyzing fear anymore, but rather a void left by the shock of everything she had faced. The muffled sound of the TV in the background reported the latest developments in the case, but she couldn't focus on the words. She was lost in her own thoughts. She remembered every detail: Gabriel's vacant stare, Clara's murmurs, the sense that something had been wrong from the start. The road to the truth had been much harder than she had ever imagined. The fight wasn't just against Clara and Felipe's lies, but also against the terror that had consumed her mind each day inside that house. Even with justice served, the trauma persisted. Mariana knew she would carry the marks of that ordeal forever. However, when she thought of Gabriel receiving the proper treatment, something lit up inside her. A sense of justice, of duty fulfilled. She had done what was right, even when fear had tried to stop her. Now, with life slowly returning to normal, she was left with only the certainty that no matter how difficult, the truth was always worth the fight. Months had passed since Mariana handed over the evidence that led to Clara and Dr. Felipe's downfall. The experience had changed something deep inside her. Sitting at her old work desk, reviewing papers that had once been part of her peaceful routine as a nurse, she realized she would never be the same again. Working for a private family was no longer an option. That chapter was closed, but something new was emerging. Her perception of the healthcare system, once idealistic, had been completely transformed. She now saw flaws and shadows where before she had only trust. Mariana understood that it wasn't just Gabriel who needed protection. Many others were in equally dangerous situations, trapped in a system that often covered up mistakes and manipulated the truth, and she knew she couldn't just sit by and watch. When she received a call from an old hospital colleague, offering an unexpected opportunity to collaborate in a medical investigation of unethical practices at a renowned clinic, Mariana hesitated for a second. The trauma from the mansion was still fresh, but something else pulsed in her chest, the determination to expose what was wrong. This time, she wouldn't just be a caretaker, she would be an active voice, an investigator, someone who would fight for the truth. With one last glance out the window, Mariana stood up and put away her nurse's coat. The new path lay ahead, filled with uncertainties and dangers, but she knew she was ready. It was the beginning of a new fight, one that she would now choose to face head-on. Did you like the story? Comment below what you thought and don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel, and press the bell icon so you don't miss any stories like this.